Okay, so today you're going to be learning how to work with some of the different art elements. I just wanted to show you my example. When I set it in the stand, it gets to be a little bit too small. The main ones that we're going to be focusing on are space, pattern, and line. Okay, we're going to use line to draw some block letters, and then we are going to create a sense of positive and negative space by using some different patterns. Okay, so again, line you should be familiar with. We have many different types of lines, and you can use all these different types of lines in your final patterns. What we're considering today, what we're spending most of our time on, is our element of space. And what we're focusing on this time is positive and negative space. Okay, so positive space is what we want the viewer to look at. So here we want the viewer to look at the teddy bear. So that would be our positive space, the object that the viewer is looking at, not the space around it. Here they have flipped it, this teacher has flipped it and given the negative space or the empty space a blue to show you how it stands out. Space, it's the distance or area between, around, above, below, or within things. So again, we're focusing on positive and negative space. So on this part of the drawing, the positive space would be the bike and the negative space would be the empty white space. But then the artist took and they colored in the negative space and left the positive space white. So they flipped it. So that makes you really look at the contour and the shape of the object. So again, here's another one that talks about positive and negative space. So first we have a stool here, okay, so this is a picture. So the stool itself is the positive space, the empty white space would be the negative space. So here it shows the stool as just a black image. So again, it's the positive space, the empty white space would be the negative space. And then here they flip-flopped it. So what we're going to be doing today is essentially the same thing. We are going to be flipping our positive and negative space. So instead of drawing in where we want the person to look, which would be our name, we're going to fill the space around our name. So it's really key. If you notice here, I have not outlined my letters. You are able to see my letters because I filled in the negative space with pattern. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to work on a slightly smaller scale for my demonstration, just so you can see it better here on the viewer. So the first thing I would recommend doing is drawing a line through the middle of your paper. So you can start by measuring the ends. Like I said, I'm working a little bit smaller. It depends on what size I decide to leave for the day. So you might measure the total length. So mine is 8.5, so I'm working 4 1/4 to find that middle here. And then very, very lightly, I'm going to take and draw a baseline for my letters. So then on the bottom of this line, or I could center my letters on this line. So I think I'm going to work with my last name today. So I'm going to start, I could start by very, very lightly drawing some stick letters. Now I'm hoping you can see these, not too bad. And I want to leave some space between them, or you could work one at a time. But I like to kind of map it out first to see that I'm filling the whole page with my letters. Okay, so I've got my last name there. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to draw on the outside of that stick letter. Again, you want to keep this light because eventually we will erase this. Okay, so there would be my block letter G. And so now I can go back in and I can erase my stick letter inside. Now that I have my name, I can go back through and erase my guidelines. Same thing with my horizontal line. I can leave it if I want to, but I don't need it. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to fill the negative space around our letters. So right now I want you to just work in pencil. It makes it a little bit easier if you change your mind. You might need to look at some ideas for patterns. So remember, patterns are when you are repeating the art elements. So you could be repeating lines, you could be repeating different shapes, colors. You can find pattern everywhere. So if you look around the room, that can give you some ideas on patterns. I also have some different drawing packets that you could use as inspiration. And you could look at some of the different patterns there. You can make it as complex or as detailed as you want. The smaller the pattern and the more detailed the pattern, the more your letters show up. So here's an example that a student did where they did outline, which I'm going to ask you not to do, but they took and they created almost like a mandala theme behind it, where they had a very radial design. So you could go even work that way. For mine, I used some different diagonals. I had some straight lines. So you can even map it out if you want to. So sometimes I even start with some bigger lines to help me create the direction that I want my pattern to go. And I break it into some smaller sections. Now that I've got those sections kind of mapped out, I can start creating some of the different patterns. So if I look at my doodles and patterns packet, I could pick out some different ones. Ooh, that's kind of fun. So I could look at something like this and think about, okay, I want to have some different diagonal lines running through here. This would probably be a good time for me to break out my ruler, and I want to have it running in contrast with my letters here. Notice everywhere that my lines, or anytime my pattern touches my letter line, I stop it. Add some more detail to this to help it stand out a little bit more. So I could add a pattern Okay, so I would do that throughout my whole thing, but I'm not going to take the time to do that now. But then, when you are completely happy with your final artwork, you're going to get some markers. Markers help to give the best contrast. If you work with pencils, colored pencils, it doesn't stand out quite as much. I might set out the Sharpies for you. There might be other markers. And what you're going to end up doing is you're going to retrace your lines. Now, if I'm working with lighter colors, I might take my eraser and erase really lightly, so that I can still see it, but that my pencil doesn't become an outline in my design. So I can even go around all these areas, and then I can take whatever colors I want to work with, and I would start to outline. Now keep in mind, it's marker. I do not stock any whiteout. So if you make a mistake, that now becomes part of your design. So you'll have to figure out a way to include it. And again, I'm trying not to color inside of my L there. Now I want you to take your time, be as nice and neat as possible. Now, do you have to color the entire paper? No. You'll notice in my example, I did leave areas where I left some color showing through of the original paper, and that's fine. So then, as you do this, you'll notice the empty space where my L is starts to stand out, and it starts to be more readable, where we're flipping and we're filling our negative space with all of our cool patterns, and then our positive space actually becomes our negative, but it stands out because we've created some contrast. These can take some time, so be patient with it, because again, taking your time, adding lots of detail, coloring it in neatly, those are the things that I'm going to be looking at when I grade this. Is how interesting are your designs? Did you create the illusion of positive and negative space? Did you add detailed patterns, interesting patterns? Did you take your time so you're coloring neatly? But notice I am not taking and outlining it. In fact, when I'm done, I'm going to take, and the marker's dry, I'm going to take my eraser and I'm going to erase, and that's what creates this implied letter within your patterns. So good luck, have fun.